So
I was a
explain-
hitchhiking hooker.
Right.
Running into trouble, I shoot the guy if I ran into trouble.
I'll be back, like Independence Day, with Jesus. That was Ailen Waros' final message before the chemicals took hold.
Each time I'd harm someone, each time I'd kill someone, there'd be an enormous amount of...
While this man, once confident and charming, died trembling and weeping. These aren't scenes from a horror film. They're the real chilling final moments of death row inmates. Thomas J. Grasso. When Thomas J. Grasso was executed by lethal injection on March 20th, 1995, at the Oklahoma State Penitentiary, his name became forever linked to one of the strangest complaints ever uttered by a man facing imminent death. Convicted of strangling 87-year-old Hilda Johnson in Oklahoma and 81-year-old Leslie Holtz in New York, Grasso's final hours were marked by a series of philosophical statements, a morbid poem about his execution, and most famously, a bizarre grievance about his last meal that would overshadow the gravity of his crime. In the hours leading up to his execution, Grasso released several written statements to the press that revealed a contemplative, almost poetic mindset. At 3 p.m., he released the statement, "What we call the beginning is often the end, and to make an end is to make a beginning. The end is where we start from." Later at 8:25 p.m., he shared, "For most of us, there is only the unattended moment, the moment in and out of time, and right action is freedom from the past and future also." A partial quote from T.S. Eliot's poem, The Dry Salvages. At 10:05 p.m., just hours before his execution, Grasso released an original poem titled A Visit with Mystery, which described in disturbing detail his impending death by lethal injection. "Ready, willing, and waiting am I, asked for death but could not die. Each sunrise is one day less, I'll endure this horrible mess. When the last sun does sink, Mr. E will serve a goodbye drink. On the day our paths do cross, it won't take much to see it through, just a little toxic brew. The warden will read my last creed, and the deadly brew will flow. As the poison drips into my veins, and from my body life does drain, I'll know then once and for all what last call means when serving Toxahol." This poem, with its detailed description of lethal injection as a toxic brew and its resigned acceptance of death, provides a disturbing glimpse into Grasso's mindset as he approached his final moments. Grasso's requested last meal was elaborate, including 24 steamed mussels, 24 steamed clams, a double cheeseburger from Burger King, barbecued spare, ribs, 2 strawberry milkshakes, half a pumpkin pie with whipped cream, diced strawberries, a mango, and a can of SpaghettiOs with meatballs. However, it was the substitution of the SpaghettiOs with regular spaghetti that would lead to Grasso's most famous statement. Less than an hour before his execution, Grasso issued what would become his most recognized statement. "I did not get my SpaghettiOs, I got spaghetti. I want the press to know this." This complaint, while seemingly trivial in the face of impending death, became a widely reported aspect of his execution, highlighting the peculiar focus on last meal requests in death penalty cases. The execution itself took place at 12:22 a.m. Central Time on March 20th, 1995. The lethal injection process involved a mixture of chemicals administered through tubes in Grasso's arms, taking 5 to 7 minutes. During this time, Grasso gasped 4 times as the lethal chemicals took effect. His eyes closed gently, and his chest barely fluttered. The silence was broken only when a prison doctor checked his pulse with a stethoscope, lifted his left eyelid, and pronounced the time of death. After his death, a hand-scrawled, misspelled statement was distributed by prison officials. "Mario Cuomo is right. Life without parole is much worse than the death penalty. All jurors should remember this. Attica and Oklahoma State Penitentiary are living hells." This statement reflected Grasso's view that death was preferable to lifelong confinement, aligning with his earlier requests to be executed rather than serve a life sentence. But while Grasso's final moments were a bizarre blend of poetry and pasta, the next inmate's descent into madness before death was something else entirely. Ailen Waros. Ailen Waros, a name that conjures images of America's most infamous female serial killer. On October 9, 2002, at Florida State Prison in Stark, Florida, the 46-year-old faced her execution by lethal injection after being convicted of murdering 6 men between 1989 and 1990. But the story of her final hours reveals a disturbing psychological landscape that continues to haunt those who witnessed her end. The morning of her execution, Waros declined the customary last meal privilege. While most condemned inmates request elaborate final feasts, steaks, fried chicken, ice cream, Ailen wants nothing more than a simple cup of coffee. This stark refusal of what many consider a final comfort speaks volumes about her mental state in those last hours. A woman who had already disconnected from earthly pleasures, or perhaps never truly experienced them at all, given her traumatic life history. As the execution approached, witnesses described Waros' behavior as increasingly bizarre. Her demeanor had deteriorated significantly in the years leading up to her execution. Documentary filmmaker Nick Broomfield, who interviewed Waros multiple times, believed she had totally lost her mind by the time of her execution, a stark contrast to the 3 psychiatrists who had evaluated her and declared her mentally competent to face death. Just 1 day before her execution, Broomfield conducted what would become Waros' final interview. Her mental state appeared fragmented, filled with paranoid delusions about prison staff subjecting her to sonic pressure and poisoning her food. When asked about her impending execution, Waros responded with unsettling calm.
I was just wondering how you're going to be, at 9:30 tomorrow morning. Are you prepared?
I'm prepared. I'm all right. I'm all right with it.
These ramblings continued as she spoke about being tortured at BCI, Broward Correctional Institution, claiming staff were using sonic pressure on her head and that they had rigged surveillance equipment in her cell.
Hey, I was tortured at BCI. They had the intercom on in the room, and they kept lying that it wasn't on, and they were using sonic pressure on my head since 1997.
Perhaps most disturbing was her description of what she believed would happen after death. Not a Christian afterlife, despite her references to God and Jesus, but something more akin to science fiction. I'm okay. I'm okay. God is going to be there. Jesus Christ is going to be there. All the angels and everything. The interview ended with a disturbing outburst, revealing the rage simmering beneath her surface. Ailen expressed deep anger and bitterness in her final moments. She said that she had lost her entire life because of what had happened to her. She believed she was denied a fair trial, a proper investigation, and even a just appeals process. In her view, society, the police, and the justice system had sabotaged her. She claimed that she was a raped woman who ended up being executed, and that her case was exploited for books, movies, political gain, and personal advancement. Ailen felt completely betrayed, accusing those involved of using her story as a stepping stone for power. She symbolically gave a 5th finger to everyone involved and delivered a harsh message. She called society an inhumane bunch of living bastards and bitches, and warned that they would eventually face devastating consequences, saying they would be nuked in the end. The actual execution, which began at 9:30 a.m. the following day, provided one final disturbing chapter. As witnesses gathered, Waros delivered her cryptic final statement. "I just like to say I'm sailing with the Rock, and I'll be back like Independence Day with Jesus June 6th. Like the movie Big Mothership and all, I'll be back." Witnesses noted that before the lethal chemicals began flowing, Waros turned to them, made a bizarre face, smiled slightly, and rolled her eyes. Her behavior in those final seconds seemed to reinforce Broomfield's assessment of her mental state. By 9:32 a.m., the lethal cocktail had taken effect. Her mouth dropped open, her eyes narrowed to slits, and she appeared to lose consciousness. At 9:47 a.m., Ailen Waros was pronounced dead. In a final macabre footnote to her troubled life, Waros' body was cremated, and her ashes were scattered beneath a tree in her native Michigan by her childhood friend Dawn Botkins. If you think her case was disturbing, wait until you hear what happened with the infamous killer clown himself, John Wayne Gacy. John Wayne Gacy. Few names evoke the same level of revulsion as John Wayne Gacy, the killer clown, who sexually assaulted and murdered at least 33 young men and boys between 1972 and 1978, burying 29 of them in the crawl space beneath his home. His execution on May 10, 1994, at the Stateville Correctional Center in Illinois, would prove to be as disturbing as his crimes, marked by technical failures, his own unrepentant attitude, and a macabre public celebration outside the prison walls. In his final days, Gacy displayed a jarring normalcy that unsettled those around him. During a prison picnic on May 9, 1994, he appeared to be in good spirits, engaging in casual conversation about mundane topics like the Chicago Cubs, while avoiding any discussion about his impending execution. His attorney, Karen Conti, remarked that Gacy didn't strike me as somebody who had a few hours left to live, highlighting the psychological disconnect between his outward composure and the horrific reality of his crimes. This disconnect had been a hallmark of Gaysy's personality throughout his life. In a television interview with Walter Jacobson prior to his execution, Gayy revealed contradictory aspects of his self-image that were profoundly disturbing. While accused of brutally murdering 33 young men, Gayy spoke about his parenting philosophy.
A lot of things that my dad did, I refuse to do, because I don't believe in hitting children. I don't believe in spoiling a child either. My values are such that if you give enough love to the children.
Even more bizarre was Gaysy's explanation of his clown persona, which has become inextricably linked to his monstrous legacy. Gayy described clowning as a form of relaxation for him. He said it allowed him to regress into childhood, to let go, and to be goofy without judgment, all while hiding behind the mask of makeup. According to him, the act of clowning provided a sense of freedom and comfort. He recalled performing as a clown, though he was uncertain if the name should be mentioned, for an ice cream company in Chicago known for offering 33 flavors. The number 33 inches appearing in this statement, matching exactly the number of his known victims, creates an unsettling coincidence that adds to the disturbing nature of his final days. For his last meal, Gayy requested a bucket of KFC chicken, a nod to his past as a KFC manager, 12 fried prawns, a pound of strawberries, French fries, and a Diet Coke. This substantial feast, consumed during the family picnic on the prison grounds, reflected a desire to indulge one final time, a stark contrast to the deprivation he had inflicted on his victims. When the time came for his execution shortly after midnight on May 10, 1994, even the process itself went awry in a disturbing fashion. What should have been a quick procedure was delayed by approximately 10 minutes due to a clog in the IV line, extending the execution to about 18 minutes, roughly 4 times longer than typical for lethal injections. Some described the prolonged process as drawn out and painful, adding a layer of unintended torture to the proceedings. The most debated aspect of Gaysy's final moments concerns his last words. Multiple sources, including media accounts and execution witnesses, state that Gaysy's final words were, "Kiss my ass," a crude and defiant statement consistent with his unrepentant demeanor. Perhaps most disturbing was the scene outside the prison walls. Nearly 1,000 people gathered to celebrate Gaysy's impending death with chants, songs, and mocking gestures. Demonstrators released balloons and carried placards with messages like, "Gayy, stick it to him," and "Death to Gayy," mocking his persona as Pogo the Clown. In a particularly macabre display, spectators laid out 33 body bags in the City Hall courtyard to represent Gaysy's confirmed victims. The chants were reportedly so loud that they could be heard from the execution building, adding a surreal and carnival-like atmosphere to what was already a grim proceeding. Gayy was pronounced dead at 12:58 a.m., marking the end of his 14-year tenure on death row. In a final ironic twist, his execution occurred on the 26th anniversary of his first arrest for sodomy in 1968, bringing his story full circle. While Gayy faced death with arrogant calm and macabre defiance, the next inmate, Carl Panzram, took things even further, meeting his end with sheer hatred for humanity. Carl Panzram. Few condemned men have faced their end with the same level of hatred and defiance as Carl Panzram. Executed by hanging on September 5, 1930, at Leavenworth Penitentiary in Kansas, Panzram's last moments were as violent and unrepentant as the life that had brought him to the gallows. His story represents perhaps the most extreme example of a man who, as he put it himself, aimed down his entire life, seeking to destroy everything and everyone around him. Panzram's life was one long exercise in brutality. By his own account, he committed 21 murders, thousands of burglaries and arsons, and numerous acts of rape and torture. His autobiography, later published as Killer, a Journal of Murder, begins with the chilling declaration, "In my lifetime, I have murdered 21 human beings. For all these things, I am not in the least bit sorry." The depth of his misanthropy was exceptional even among serial killers. As described in an interview about him,
Panzram was brutalized when he was a child, like just beyond belief. And he decided that he was going to aim down for his whole life. And so he almost started a war between Great Britain and the United States. He wanted to burn everything to the ground, everything.
In the days leading up to his execution, Panzram maintained his characteristic hatred. He wrote letters to the Society for the Abolishment of Capital Punishment and President Herbert Hoover, urging them not to intervene in his execution. In one letter, he expressed his contempt for humanity, writing, "The only thanks you and your kind will ever get from me for your efforts on my behalf is that I wish you all had one neck and that I had my hands on it." On the morning of September 5, 1930, 1930, Panzram was brought to the gallows at Leavenworth Penitentiary for the murder of R.G. Warnke, a civilian laundry room foreman at the prison. What followed would become one of the most infamous execution scenes in American history. As officers attempted to place the customary black hood over his head, Panzram spat in the executioner's face, a gesture that underscored his contempt for authority even in his final moments. When asked if he had any last words, Panzram delivered a now infamous retort. "Hurry it up, you Hoosier bastard. I could hang a dozen men while you're fooling around." The sentiment, impatience, defiance, and a boastful reference to his violent nature. Additionally, Panzram reportedly expressed a broader hatred for humanity during his final moments, stating, "I wish all mankind had one neck so I could choke it." At 6:18 a.m., Panzram was pronounced dead at age 39. And just when you think it can't get darker, along comes a man who killed not for power or rage, but simply to get himself executed. Enter James Donald French. James French. The case of James Donald French stands out for its troubling psychology and the dark humor that has made his alleged last words infamous in the annals of execution history. Executed by electrocution on August 10, 1966, at the Oklahoma State Penitentiary, French's story is particularly disturbing because he deliberately committed murder to force the state to execute him, using the justice system as a tool for his own suicidal desires. French's path to death row began in 1958, when, while hitchhiking across Texas, he kidnapped and killed Frank Boone, a motorist who had offered him a ride. This crime led to a life sentence, but it was his second murder, committed while incarcerated, that would ultimately lead to his execution. In 1961, French strangled his cellmate, Eddie Lee Shelton, on October 17th. According to psychiatric evaluations, this act was motivated by French's suicidal tendencies. Unable to take his own life due to fear, he killed Shelton to ensure the state would impose the death penalty. This psychological motivation creates one of the most disturbing aspects of French's case. He manipulated the justice system and took another human life simply to achieve his own death. One psychiatrist noted that French had attempted suicide multiple times but chickened out at the last moment. Before his execution, French made a request that adds another layer of psychological complexity to his case. He asked that a psychiatrist hypnotize him to uncover what is wrong inside of him, a request that went unfulfilled. He also told prison staff, "I'm not dying for murder. I am dying for my beliefs," suggesting he viewed his execution as a personal choice rather than a consequence of his crimes. The most infamous aspect of French's last moments concerns his alleged final statement. How's this for your headline? French fries. This quote, popularized by the Book of Lists, 1977, has become one of the most widely cited examples of gallows humor. The pun referencing his surname and the electric chair has cemented his place in discussions of notorious death. Row statements. French's execution on August 10, 1966 was significant for several reasons. It was the last execution in Oklahoma before the U.S. Supreme Court's Furman v. Georgia decision suspended the death penalty nationwide from 1972 to 1976, and it was the only execution in the United States in 1966. The execution was carried out using the electric chair, with 2,300 volts of electricity applied for 54 seconds. According to an Associated Press reporter cited in Wikipedia, French walked calmly into the execution chamber at 10 p.m. and faced his death with cockiness. Our final story returns to a far more chilling figure, one whose charming mask hid some of the most horrific crimes in U.S. history, Ted Bundy. Ted Bundy. Perhaps no execution in American history has garnered more public attention than that of Ted Bundy on January 24, 1989. As one of America's most notorious serial killers, responsible for the murders of at least 30 young women across multiple states, Bundy's final days were marked by emotional turmoil, controversial confessions, and a public spectacle that revealed the darker side of American justice. In the hours leading up to his execution, Bundy presented a starkly different figure from the charismatic, confident law student who had defended himself in court years earlier. He spent the night weeping and praying with Methodist minister Fred Lawrence, a significant departure from his typically composed demeanor. He made 2 final phone calls to his mother, Louise Bundy, who reportedly told him, "You'll always be my precious son," a poignant reminder of the human connections that existed even for someone who had committed such monstrous acts. Bundy was offered a traditional last meal of steak, eggs, and toast, but refused it, leaving it untouched. The reality of his impending death had finally overwhelmed his appetite or interest in such rituals. The night before his execution, Bundy gave a 45-minute interview to religious broadcaster Dr. James Dobson. In this final interview, Bundy made a controversial confession, attributing his violent behavior to pornography addiction.
Until you reach the point where the pornography only goes so far. You reach that jumping off point where you begin to wonder if maybe actually doing it will give you that which is beyond just reading about it or looking at it.
This claim has been controversial, with many viewing it as a manipulation tactic to deflect responsibility. Bundy further elaborated on his state of mind after committing his first murder. Bundy admitted that even after all the years that had passed, speaking about his crimes remained extremely difficult. He explained that revisiting those events through conversation was painful and unsettling. He wanted others to understand what he experienced, describing it as if he had emerged from a terrible trance or nightmare, something surreal and horrifying that he struggled to fully comprehend himself. In a chilling statement that would later be widely quoted, Bundy warned about others like him living in communities across America.
We are your sons and we are your husbands. And we grew up in regular families. And pornography can reach out and snatch a kid out of any house today.
When asked about the remorse he felt for his victims and their families, Bundy struggled to articulate his emotions. Bundy acknowledged the emotional burden of his actions, asking whether the weight of remorse was present. He admitted that some might accuse him of being self-serving in expressing these feelings, but he insisted that at that point, it no longer mattered. He was simply being honest about what he felt inside. On the morning of January 24th, 1989, Bundy was led into the execution chamber in the Q Wing of Florida State Prison. When asked by Superintendent Tom Barton if he had any last words, Bundy hesitated, his voice quavering, and said, "Jim and Fred, I'd like you to give my love to my family and friends," referring to his lawyer Jim Coleman and minister Fred Lawrence. The execution process itself was methodical and clinical. Bundy was strapped to the electric chair with a metal skull cap placed on his shaved head, treated with ointment to enhance electrode conductivity. A heavy black veil was lowered over his face, and a thick strap was secured across his mouth and chin. At the signal, an anonymous executioner administered 2,000 volts, causing Bundy's body to tense and his hands to clench. A small puff of smoke was observed rising from his right leg, a grim detail noted by witnesses. He was pronounced dead at 7:16 a.m. FBI Special Agent Bill Hagmeyer, present during Bundy's final days, recounted Bundy's reaction to hearing about the crowds gathering outside. Bundy reportedly remarked, "And these people say I'm crazy?" A disturbing moment of clarity that highlighted the thin line between justice and vengeance. Following the execution, Bundy's body was cremated and his ashes were scattered in the Cascade Mountains of Washington State, as per his request. This location was significant and deeply disturbing, as it was where he had disposed of several victims, including Linda Ann Healy, Donna Gail Manson, Roberta Kathleen Parks, and Brenda Carroll Ball. The disturbing final moments of these 6 notorious death row inmates offer us a unique window into the complex psychology of those facing imminent death. The crowds cheering outside Bundy's and Gacy's executions reveal something troubling about our capacity for celebration in the face of death, even when that death may be justified as punishment for heinous crimes. As we reflect on these disturbing last moments, we're left to wonder about the thin line between justice and vengeance, between punishment and spectacle, and ultimately about what these final hours reveal, not just about those condemned to die, but about the society that condemns them. That's it for this video. If you liked it, make sure to subscribe and check out the cards on your screen right now to keep watching more.